Hi, my name is Charles, and I am a 44-year-old gay man. I realize that I'm a lot older than a lot of the young people who are posting their coming out stories here to YouTube, but having watched as many of the coming out videos as I have, I realize that maybe, possibly, if I were to share my story, it might help some of you who are also struggling with these issues, and I hope it does. I'm going to give a real brief overview of my coming out experience, and then I'm going to make some more videos that goes into it a little bit more in depth and with a lot more detail. But basically, right now, I just want to share just a real basic overview of my experience in coming out. I grew up in a Christian home, a Pentecostal home, with very conservative family. My mother's side of the family was all Christian, mostly in the Assemblies of God Church, very homophobic, and I grew up with nothing but negativity and horror stories being told to me about gay people and the gay lifestyle, and I mean, it was just a nightmare to hear all this negativity and all these horrible things about how wicked and how evil and how lustful and out of control gay and lesbian people are. And from my earliest youth, and I mean, I can go back probably to when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, I remember having affectionate feelings toward members of the same sex. Some people want to tell you that being gay is all about sex. It's all about sexual attraction. It's all about sexual energy. I'm one of the people in the world who happens to believe that being gay has a whole lot more to do with our psyche and our mental state as much as it has to do with any kind of sexual attraction, because long before I had awakened as a sexual human being, I was already feeling affection toward members of the same sex. I was being drawn in an affectionate way, had nothing in the world to do with sex, toward members of the same sex. And of course, growing up in the environment that I grew up in, I just knew this was wrong and it was evil and it was horrible and I had to do something. And being a young man who believed very strongly in my faith and who believed very strongly in the Lord Jesus Christ, I begged God, I pleaded with God over the course of my youth and growing up. I begged God and pleaded with God to deliver me from this demon and this horrible demonic power that had its hold on me. And I remember growing up, you know, constantly in a state of depression. I was constantly going through these very, very, very deep depressions that felt like they were so deep I could never get out of them. And it was all because of this issue. Now, I have to tell you, I don't think for 1 second that I would have experienced this level of depression and despondency, even becoming at times suicidal. I don't think any of that would have happened if it weren't for the input of my family and those around me and the kids at school and things like that. If it hadn't been for all the negativity and all the stereotypes that were attached to being gay, I don't think for 1 minute that I would have experienced so much depression and becoming suicidal and feeling at times growing up like I was almost losing my mind. And I'm sure that there are a lot of you that are even watching this video and you really identify with what I'm saying, because even you feel at times like you're almost crazy, like you're losing your mind. And it's all because of this identity struggle and this battle that you're experiencing internally. You want so hard to please your family. You want so hard to please the church. You want so hard to please God. And you've been conditioned and indoctrinated, like I was, to believe that to be gay, you were going to destroy all of these things. You were going to destroy your family. You were going to destroy yourself. You were going to destroy your future. That you were going to offend God and wind up in a hot burning hell. And you'd be turned out from the church and experience all these negative and horrible things. And of course, preachers would get in the pulpit when I was growing up and tell all these stories about how gay people die young and they're miserable and they're depressed and they have these terrible lives. Well, of course, going through all the depression I went through as a kid, I thought that was because I was gay. At the time, I was too young and not experienced enough in life to realize that the depression was born of the conflict between the message I was being sent by my parents, by my church, by my family, by society, by kids in school, and what I was feeling internally. You see, I thought that all the depression and all the negativity that I was feeling and all the horrible stuff was the byproduct of my being gay internally. And I knew on the inside that I was gay. But growing up, I couldn't admit to anybody that I was gay. I couldn't even talk about it. I was one of the most homophobic people that you've ever met. I used to go out of my way to preach at gay, lesbian people and tell them how their lifestyle was wrong, because I felt like the more I preached at them, the more, in effect, I was preaching to myself. And that the more I tried to straighten others out, the more I could help to straighten myself out. And of course, I also believed that if I could one day just meet the right girl and get hooked up with the right woman, you know, that would change everything. That would fix me. And this is one of the most horrible lies that we hear in the mainstream society today, is this notion that if you just meet the right woman, it'll fix you, it'll straighten you out. All you need is the right woman. And sadly, I know so many gay men and lesbian women who have married partners of the opposite sex in an effort to satisfy their family and make their family and their church and God and make all of these different people happy. And then they wind up so miserable and so unhappy because they spend the entirety of their life suppressing who they really are and suppressing what is natural for them, which is simply to be drawn to an emotional, psychological, spiritual, intimate, physical relationship with a member of the same gender, as though that's just some hideous, horrible thing. So I went through all the depression. I went through all the negativity. I became suicidal at times, and even then I couldn't admit, even to a psychiatrist or to a doctor, I couldn't admit that I was dealing with the gay issue because it was just such a horrible thing. I couldn't bring myself to even mention it. And I remember as a young person, finally about 17, 18 years old, I dealt with a psychologist, and she tried real hard to help me to come to grips with this issue. She knew that I was dealing with this issue, and I could not, for all the money in the world, I couldn't admit that I was gay or that I even had these issues internally. So I just would avoid it, and I would say anything I had to say to get away from that subject, because I was not about to admit that I, this good Christian boy, wrestled with these issues internally. Finally, in 1989, I was about 23 years old, 24 years old, and I went through an experience that kind of finally forced me to just have to deal with who I was and whether or not I was going to live the rest of my life suppressing my attractions and suppressing what I felt on the inside, or whether I was finally just going to be honest with myself, be honest with God, be honest with people, be honest with my family, and just live my life openly and honestly, and whatever the ramifications of that are, tough. In 1989, I went through an experience that helped me to realize that all the years I spent of trying to suppress who I was and suppress what I was feeling were just wasted years. And I finally acknowledged in myself that I was in fact gay. And I left the church, and I left all of that behind, and just decided, you know what, I'm going to be honest with myself. I'm going to be who I am. And I began to go out and pursue just being a gay man.